So, it's Le Pride Month, and Bridget is Le Trans, and depending on who you talk to, she is also Le Gay. Look, I'm gonna keep it real for a moment. I used to main Bridget, and despite being cis, Bridget is a bit of a comfort character for me, so I just want an excuse to make a video about her. As for why shipping specifically, well, since shipping is basically just a romantic canon, I believe when approached with a healthy mindset and an acceptance that your ship isn't canon and most of the time will never be canon, shipping can be a fun way to explore certain character dynamics, as well as really ask yourself how well you know the characters in question, since a good ship does tend to have some decent logic behind it. At least decent enough for the person shipping them. Granted, there have been cases where people have done some insanely shitty things in the other ship they liked, but in my opinion that's more so the fault of the individual rather than the fault of shipping as a whole. But that's a discussion for a whole different video that is preferably not made by me. So with all that being said, I picked out 4 ships that I thought would be really fun to talk about. The first 2 being popular ships within the fandom, and the last 2 being pairings I personally ship. So without further ado, let's begin. Starting off, we have probably the most well-known ship in this list, and until recently, was basically the de facto ship for Bridget. For some reason. Yeah, this might be surprising to a lot of people that came into the fandom around Strive Season 4, but before Unica existed, a lot of people shipped Bridget with May, and no, I don't know why, but I have some educated guesses. Now, I'm guessing the main reason people ship this is because, well, it's 2 cute girls kissing, and no matter what fandom it is, a ship like that's always gonna do well. And I don't blame people for shipping it because, goddamn, I'm sitting here stressed the hell out about life and the future and stuff like that. And suddenly, I see a picture of 2 cute girls kissing on my phone, and I'm all like, nice. In other words, this is mainly a ship that came to be purely because of the vibes. And in that respect, I agree. The vibes are immaculate. But really, the vibes are all this ship really has going for it, since despite supposedly being friends in canon, these 2 characters don't really interact much, and I imagine the only other thing this ship provides is an alternative shipping partner for May. Since, while this aspect of her character was toned down a bit in Strive, another aspect of May's character is the fact that she has a massive crush on Johnny, who canonically is her adoptive father, and naturally a lot of people look at that and go, ew. Personally, I can kind of see what they were trying to go for, since in the first game, and to an extent the X and XX games, May was supposed to be the young, naive, childish character of the cast, and since Johnny adopting her did massively change her life for the better, I kind of see her developing a crush on him while still being naive enough to not realize how and why that's a bad thing. And thankfully, Johnny hasn't really shown any signs of reciprocating those feelings for her in any way, shape, or form, so thank God for that. But overall, yeah, I can kind of see why people ship Mayberry, but personally speaking, the next 3 ships I'm going to be talking about have a lot more meat on their bones. Next up is the ship that's probably most likely to become canon in my opinion, Uniberry. And the reason why I think this is more likely to become canon compared to every other ship in the video is because, well, the 2 characters involved, Unica and Bridget, have actually had consistent interaction with each other. Granted, Unica is the newest character to be introduced to the franchise so far, being introduced in the recent Guilty Gear anime Dual Rulers. Now, since the anime is still fairly recent, having only come out and ended a few months ago, I'm not going to get much into spoilers, but basically at the start of the show, Unica starts off as a bad guy who wants to wipe out all gears, and a few episodes in, ends up heavily injured after having a fight with Sin. Shortly afterwards, Bridget finds her and takes her to a nearby beach area to get patched up. From there, she defects, and a bunch of spoiler stuff happens that I'm not even going to bother getting into, so long story short, while obviously not the only contributing factor, Bridget still played a massive role in Unica's arc during the anime. So this coupled with a lot of cute interactions they have in Strive, and it's not really hard to see why this ship got so popular, despite Unica being a fairly recent addition to the series. Okay, now we're getting into the pairings that I personally ship, despite neither of them being as likely to happen as Uniberry is. And starting off, we have a ship that's a bit of an oldie, but one hell of a goodie, Jamboree. Now this ship is very interesting in my opinion for a couple reasons. Mainly because so far, the only time these two characters were in the same game together were the XX games, which is also the games that introduced Bridget to the series, and is also when she was still going by he/him pronouns. I bring this up because in the XX games, there was a running joke where in some of the story modes, people would mistake Bridget for a girl, despite the fact that at the time she identified as male, with one of the few exceptions to this being Jam, who knows Bridget was a boy, and referred to them as such. Now, despite a lot of this aging very weirdly in hindsight, I do think these factors make the ship a lot more interesting, since, again, at the time, Bridget did identify as male, so I imagine not having to correct someone on their preferred pronouns for once was probably at the very least a little bit refreshing. But there's also another layer to this, since, as I'm sure most of you know by now, her arcade mode in Strife has her realizing she's trans. And when talking about this ship specifically, that kind of begs the question of how Jam would react. Not to imply that Jam is any kind of bigot, since the only time she really shows any hatred for someone in the series is when that person happens to be involved in her restaurant and/or food stand getting destroyed, which, you know, fair enough. When I say this, I'm more so referring to how long it would take for Jam to realize Bridget is trans, and whether or not Bridget would actively try to hide this fact from her. Since, while there's not a doubt in my mind Jam would accept her no questions asked, a lot of things have changed for both characters, that when considering the characters' history together, there's no way this wouldn't be awkward as heck, at least on Bridget's end. And personally, as a fanfic writer, this is the kind of drama I eat for breakfast, so. Alright, since this is the last ship we'll be talking about today, I thought why not end it with a massive wildcard. That's right, we're wrapping this up with a crossover ship. That also happens to fall under the opposite track umbrella to an extent. Not so much in terms of personality, since in that regard, they're actually quite similar since both characters can be described as very friendly and cheerful. When I call these characters opposites of each other, I'm referring to the fact that despite having a very similar starting point of being very feminine looking despite being born male, both characters actually walk very different paths to a degree that they're basically two sides of the same coin. Where Astolfo is almost never put into a situation where he has to confront his gender identity, and is very much happy and content with just being a cute, wholesome femboy. Emphasis on wholesome. By contrast, mainly due to being born into a village that has very weird superstitions about twin boys, a lot of conflicts Bridget faces usually involves her having to confront her own gender identity in some way, shape, or form. From having to disprove said superstition in the XX games, to her arcade mode in Strive having her confronting and then accepting her trans identity, to her then talking about her said experiences with an injured Miko, which incidentally prevents a genocide from happening. God, I love guilty here. Despite both characters walking very different paths in life, and having very different conclusions on who they are, the fact that both characters are able to live happily with the fact that they don't exactly conform to gender norms is something I find really sweet and admirable about both characters, to the point where despite not relating at all to either character's struggle, both of them are actually massive comfort characters. So overall, if there's one thing I want you all to take away from this video, is this. I like Yuri.